Last time on Mistborn. Just to clarify, pre-ascension, anytime I say that, just means before the final empire, before the Lord Ruler ascended to become the Lord Ruler. Is asking him about the survivor of Hathsin and if he has any information about that, or the growing rebellion among the Skaa. Elend gives her his handkerchief to clean up her makeup and wipe up her tears and stuff, and also tells her that she can keep it, kind of calling back to what Spook did earlier, where we learned that a nobleman will give a woman his handkerchief if he's interested in courting her, and Elend really seems like he means it. Vin goes out to the balcony and downs a vial of metals and jumps off the balcony, and Steel pushes off the coins to fly over to a tower closer to Elend's room. She actually locates Elend's room by listening at the window, and when she hears his and his friends' voices, she listens to them for a little while to kind of get a gauge of what this meeting is about. Mostly they're all talking about government, and no one really agrees fully with Elend on the fact that the Skaa are mistreated, but regardless of that, they do all agree that the Lord Ruler has too much power. After listening for a few minutes, she hears someone whisper her name above her and looks up to see Kelsier there staring at her, waiting for her. They have a little bit of a discussion, and Kelsier tells Vin that he's been listening in on these meetings since Vin made him aware of them, and also that he doesn't really take any of these beliefs they have about the Lord Ruler having too much power, or Elend's opinions about the Skaa being mistreated, as serious things that they believe. He feels like they're just politicking and building alliances, and these might not really be their opinions. Kelsier obviously shares the same opinion as Dockson, that all noblemen are bad at the end of the day, but he does agree when Vin requests that they don't kill Elend or his friend, since Kelsier does kind of agree with her also that they seem not as bad as the other nobles that, Kelsier is not very fond of. Vin understands their perspective, especially with the mission they're on. Not thinking that the nobles going down collectively is good would be pretty bad for the psyche, since that would make them put into question if what they're doing is right. But she also doesn't believe that all the nobles are as bad as Kelsier and Dockson think they are. Kelsier tells her when she gets back to the party she's covered in ash, so she needs to cover herself because that would definitely make people wonder about her, and that he will meet her at Clubs' shop. When she gets back to Clubs' shop, the whole crew is there, with Kelsier obviously having returned and Ham having returned with him, and they all sit down to have some drinks and kind of talk about the plan, and this is kind of the first moment where we really see how bonded all of these people are and how close they've become throughout this entire story. We can also take note here that there is a comparison to be made to when Vin first met the crew and she did not trust anyone enough to drink anything that she had not gotten for herself, but here she is handed a glass of wine and drinks it without even thinking about it, showing a lot of character growth. But after they talk about the plan for a while, they agree that Vin will go with Ham the next day to go meet with the people from the Luthadel garrison. Vin also updates them on the status of the noble houses, telling them that she thinks that some of them will be leaving town now since they are starting to get assassinated, and the noble war is kind of on the horizon and everyone sort of sees it coming. The next day, Vin accompanies Ham to go meet with the Luthadel garrison, and they kind of talk about his family along the way. He doesn't really share anything about where they live or their names or anything, but he does tell her that he has kids and a wife, and he is really protective of them because if he ever got caught, then the ministry would also go after his kids, since they could be Mistings or Mistborn as well, since it does pass down through noble blood. Vin also learns that Ham's eventual plan is to move out away from Luthadel, kind of out into a different part of the world where the money that he has saved can buy him privacy and safety, so he can kind of live out the rest of his life with his family and quietly instead of as a thief. They also discuss Kelsier and how he's been kind of making himself into sort of a messiah figure and how uncomfortable that makes all of them. But Ham reassures Vin that the rest of the crew at least, has already kind of gotten together and agreed that they need to confront Kelsier about this because it is sort of getting out of hand. Ham also gives Vin some quick tips on how to use pewter better in combat. Mostly the difference that he says is pewter burns very quickly, which is something that we've been told sort of throughout the book. And he tells her that you shouldn't burn pewter just continuously for like a whole fight. Even if you need the extra strength, you should, burn it right before you punch or right before you block, or if you're a little bit off balance, like you should use it kind of sparingly and correctively, just exactly where you need it so you don't waste it since it burns so fast. And also it can help you avoid pewter-dragging, which is where you use pewter for a long period of time, and it can be really hard on your body and even lead to death. Ham also explains that he knows the people who work in the Luthadel garrison. They're kind of like combat buddies, like soldier friends of his. And they don't know he's a Misting. They just know he kind of works in the underground somewhat vaguely, and they've tried to recruit him a bunch of times. So this is not going to be like an infiltration mission. He knows these people, and they're familiar with him. Vin kind of calls out that Ham seems like he's friends with these people, and that might be a little bit weird during the Battle of Luthadel when their army comes, that he'll be fighting these people. But Ham kind of elaborates that these people are all mercenaries. Like, there is a separation in their life between what they do for money, which is fight, and like who they are friends with, and they separate those things. So that's just kind of how it is as a soldier. You put those things aside when it comes to war or battle. This is something that I think you see across a lot of fantasy series, this kind of idea that soldiers will separate war from kind of their personal life, and that they can still be friends, but also willing to fight one another on the battlefield. I think it's interesting how direct Ham is here about it. He doesn't really beat around the bush or have anything deep to say about it. He's just kind of like, that's how it is. They reach the garrison, and the guard at the front lets Ham in, and they bring the captain over to talk to Ham after Ham requests to talk to him. The captain tells Ham that he won't be sparring for a while, and also asks to speak to Ham privately, which normally would work, but Vin just burns tin and listens to their conversation anyways. Vin hears the captain tell Ham that apparently there is a huge army of rebels up north that has attacked, and the garrison is being deployed to go deal with them. This is obviously extremely alarming for both Ham and Vin, because they have a rebel army that is up in the north and should not be attacking right now, and they think that the odds that this is the same army are probably very high, so they immediately are alarmed and kind of rush away back to Club's shop. When they get to the shop and divulge this information, everybody is obviously in a panic, trying to figure out why the army attacked so preemptively. Kelsier is sending some of the crew members out to warn all the places where they've had meetings that the ministry might be coming in case people are captured, and also just kind of like buttoning up loose ends, telling everyone where the backup hideout is, where all the bolt holes are, that kind of stuff, in case they need to get away because they're kind of have been found out. Kelsier's packing up his bag when he sees that Vin has also fully packed hers, and she says she's coming along. He tells her that it's obviously going to be a very rough trip, but she basically says she doesn't care and comes along anyways. Kelsier gives her 5 beads of pewter and tells her to swallow them because she's going to need them for their trip. They leave, now donning their mist cloaks so no one will mess with them, especially seeing Mistborn during the day is pretty rare. And as they get on their journey, Vin realizes what they're actually going to be doing, which is sprinting between the city and where the rebel cave is, which is going to be about 16 hours of burning pewter straight. Time sort of becomes a blur, and Vin is lost in the run, basically only being able to put her mind on flaring pewter and putting one foot in front of the other as they run through the entire night and well into the morning. As you can imagine, there is some tension here, not only because obviously what has happened with the army is like a little bit stressful, and there's like curious what's going to happen because of it and what's going on, but also with Vin and Kelsier, there is some tension because we've just learned how dangerous it is to pewter drag for long periods of time. Also, before they leave, just as a side note, Vin does mention that the last time she went on a mission with Kelsier, she was laid up in bed for like a month, recovering from an injury. So that all together doesn't really bode well for their trip, as at least based on the historical evidence of how well they've done in the past. When they finally start to hear yelling and fighting, they stop, and Kelsier tells Vin that basically she now has to keep burning pewter because she's pushed her body so hard that without it, she'll just fall unconscious. They crest the hill that they heard the fighting behind, and what they find is a uniformed army cleaning up the last of their ragtag Skaa army. Kelsier's first instinct is to run in and save the last couple of men, but Vin kind of tells him not to because, as he told her earlier, they're not invincible, and he would really just end up getting himself killed. She also reminds him that they probably wouldn't have taken everyone out, even if they did attack preemptively, and there's probably people still back at the army base in the cave, and there is no doubt that at this point the Ministry is searching for where the hideout is located. They get to the cave and they find Captain Demise, who is the man that Kelsier helped beat the much better swordsman the last time he was visiting the army, the thing that we kind of felt was ethically not okay. And he tells them that basically there's about 2,000 people left in the caves and they need to get them out and somewhere else before the Ministry locates the cave. Most of the men have already prepared a kit to escape, so they all leave and march throughout the day to get far away from the cave. And when they settle down for the night, one of the Skaa approaches Kelsier. He is one of the Skaa from Tressting's plantation, and him and Kelsier have a conversation about what happened. Kelsier really feels responsible for the men who died because he was the one who had really given them all of this hope and confidence and sort of misled them about how allomancy works when he had visited previously, and that is part of what led them to make the decision that they did. This is also the first point in the story, in my mind, where we actually start to wonder, like, are they going to succeed? Is this possible? Is everything going to work out? Because this army was so much of the effort and so crucial to the plan, and now it just isn't working out at all. The man from Tressting's plantation explains that basically the motivation behind attacking preemptively was to get some of the troops some real combat experience, and that really they just got overconfident, especially Eden. But the man does remind Kelsier that he managed to train, arm, and fight with the biggest Skaa army that has ever existed. The Skaa army was able to take out an entire garrison of the Lord Ruler's troops before they were defeated, likely making this the biggest victory in Skaa history as far as the rebellion is concerned. Instead of encouraging Kelsier, this actually makes him realize that he's not only fighting against the Lord Ruler and the Ministry, but also 1,000 years of conditioning that have made the Skaa feel like their situation is inevitable, there's nothing they can do about it, and that the Lord Ruler can't be disposed. It takes them about 2 weeks to get back to Luthadel, and when they get back, Vin still doesn't feel good from Pewter-dragging for so long. And when she comes downstairs after they kind of get back for the night and she has one night of rest, they ask her what she thinks about their situation. She basically tells them that the job is like dead in the water now. They don't have the army that was so crucial to their plans, and the crew is kind of redundant, and she thinks basically that they should just call it quits, and everyone else in the crew kind of agrees. That is until Kelsier comes down and is in a cheery mood, which they all find odd, and they kind of ask him about it, and he basically says this is a setback, but it does not ruin our plans, and that there's other things in motion. Breeze and Kelsier get into an argument, with Breeze basically saying that Kelsier doesn't really care about the adium or about the plan. He's just sort of doing this for his own ego, and he's kind of using everyone in the crew in this way. But as they are discussing this, Spook, Club's apprentice, comes down and tells them that there is a gathering in the square near the fountain, and they all go to watch. It might seem odd that they are leaving to go to the fountain square to go to this random kind of gathering, but what's really going on, and it's explained to us, is that the Lord Ruler does executions in the square, and all Skaa men are required to attend any executions that are going on, as well as all the nobles, regardless of sex or gender. So the crew watches as children and men and women are beheaded, and these aren't even criminals. These are just random Skaa that the Lord Ruler has gathered up, basically just as a show of force to kill them because of what happened with the Skaa army and how they attacked his garrison. Kelsier sees the nobles kind of like laughing and jovial and having a good time, but Vin notices that Elend and his friends don't seem like they're having a good time. They're not laughing. They're not jovial. They seem very somber, and that she also notices that a lot of the nobles kind of look somber. It seems like they don't really enjoy this as much as Kelsier seems to think they do. And with this anger and his argument with Breeze, Kelsier launches into a speech here, which I'm going to read some of to you. Breeze, you asked about the adium. I'll be honest, it was never my main goal. I gathered this crew because I wanted to change things. We'll grab the adium. We'll need it to support a new government. But this job isn't about making me or any of you wealthy. Eden is dead. He was our excuse. a way that we could do something good while still pretending to be nothing more than thieves. Now that he's gone, you can give up if you want. Quit. But that won't change anything. The struggle will go on. Men will still die. You'll just be ignoring it. It's time to stop the charade, Kelsier said, staring at them each in turn. If we're going to do this now, we have to be upfront and honest with ourselves. We have to admit that it isn't about the money. It's about stopping that. He pointed at the courtyard with its red fountains, a visible sign of death for the thousands of Skaa too far away to tell what was happening. I intend to continue my fight, Kelsier said quietly. I realize that some of you question my leadership. You think I've been building myself up too much with the Skaa. You whisper that I'm making myself into another Lord Ruler. You think that my ego is more important to me than overthrowing the Empire. You're wrong, Kelsier said softly. You have to trust me. You gave me your confidence when we began this plan, despite how dangerous things seemed. I still need that confidence. No matter how things appear, no matter how terrible the odds, we have to keep fighting. He continues on and basically tells them that they're absolutely welcome to stay on with the plan, but if they do, they have to stop whispering about him behind his back, and if they have a problem with the way that things are being run, they need to just talk to him about it. So, with no one leaving and everyone kind of agreeing, Kelsier goes on to explain that now the Luthadel garrison will be out of the city chasing the rest of these rebels for the next couple of months, and one of their biggest hurdles was getting the garrison out of Luthadel, even if the way that they did it cost them much more than they had anticipated. So he basically says they can continue recruiting, and if they can take the palace, then those men in the garrison are theirs anyway. They're just mercenaries, so if they can take the palace and get the addium and have money to pay them, then they're on their side now. They have no loyalty to the Lord Ruler. He also says that the nobles are already set on the path to war, and the remaining people in the garrison that have stayed back in Luthadel won't be able to contain that, so that will also give them the chaos that they need. The fact that this conversation is going on while Skaa are being executed 4 at a time in the background is very thematic. The scene that it sets is very striking and reflective of the sacrifice both personally and in lives lost that is going to happen before this war is over. I wouldn't go as far as calling it foreshadowing, but I would say that the story is definitely getting darker as we continue, and that isn't going to let up. After the executions are done, they return back to Clubs' shop to talk about how the plan can move forward in the current state. They all agree that the noble war now is more important than ever because those are the people who really enforce the subjugation of the Skaa and who also uphold the entire economy of the Final Empire, so they really need them to start taking each other out. Vin is obviously going to be crucial for that as their spy on the inside, and Ham and Breeze are going to use some of their aliases as nobles to spread some misinformation and kind of get the ball rolling there. Other than that, Kelsier will continue recruiting, and they will continue to build up their force as much as they can before they have to attack the castle. As they are wrapping up their meeting, Sazed shows up with a note for Kelsier. It is from Marsh, who says he has some news and needs to meet with Kelsier, and he invites Vin along. I'm just going to warn you that this next conversation is a little bit long and a little bit of an exposition dump, but it is very important, and we learn a lot of things that will come up throughout the series in it as well. Now Vin and Kelsier have made it to their meeting place with Marsh, but they have a little while to chat before Marsh gets there, and Vin starts asking Kelsier about the 11th medal, which he confirms is real, but also basically says he doesn't really know how to use it or what it does, and he does believe that the legends that he's read are true, though. This track of conversation continues, and they are talking about the Lord Ruler, and Kelsier confirms that they know that he is neither omnipotent nor invincible, because if he was omnipotent, obviously he would have just shut down their rebellion already because he would have known it was going on. And if he was invincible, he wouldn't have to do what he does with the Skaa, executing them and things like that, to keep the Skaa in check and to keep himself afloat as the Lord Ruler. He wouldn't have to care because he couldn't be killed or taken down at all. Now that they have the Lord Ruler's logbook, they kind of know that he was a regular person at some point. So Kelsier kind of deduces that this power that he has must come from his money and wealth. Vin isn't so sure, mostly because during the execution, they know that he was soothing like tens of thousands of Skaa at the same time. So he must have power that is like different than your average allomancer because, nobody they know would be able to do that. Vin also tells Kelsier that she thinks there's something going on because she was burning copper at the Skaa execution, and she could still feel him soothing her through her copper, which is supposed to be impossible, which basically Kelsier just says that she's just imagining things. Vin also brings up feruchemy, asking if it's more powerful than allomancy, and Kelsier says that it's not, it's just different, but we do learn that they can store a ton of different traits that you can't get with allomancy, things like physical age, mental clarity, speed, all kinds of different physical attributes that they can store in metal for later use. The main advantage that, in my opinion, feruchemy has over allomancy is that it doesn't have a limit. A feruchemist can store enough strength to make themselves twice as strong for a full day, but they could use that same amount of strength to make themselves 5 or 6 times stronger for a much shorter duration, so they have much more control over kind of the duration and intensity that they are burning up their resources. He elaborates by saying that, in his opinion, adium is kind of the difference maker in what makes allomancer so powerful, because regardless of how strong a feruchemist is, if an allomancer has adium, then they really can't be beat by a feruchemist because they'd be able to see everything they're about to do coming. And with that, he also gives her a bead of adium and tells her to swallow it just in case they are being led into a trap and Marsh has been captured. They discuss the Lord Ruler for a few minutes, and Kelsier updates Vin that Sazed is translating the last part of it now, which is kind of the most important part because that's theoretically where the Lord Ruler became the Lord Ruler when he reached the Well of Ascension, but he's not quite done yet, so they don't quite know what happened. Vin also remembers that she's been meaning to ask Kelsier about the 9th metal, which he never taught her. Kelsier tells her that it's gold, but burning it can be a pretty uncomfortable experience. Even so, though, he shaves off a few shavings from a boxing, which are pure gold, to let her try it. When Vin burns it, she sees 2 versions of herself. One version is her as she is now, and the other one is as paranoid and untrusting as she was before she got involved with, Kelsier and the crew and everybody. And when she touches that less trusting, more paranoid version of herself, she's just flooded by feelings of worthlessness and ineptitude. Kelsier tells her that no one really knows what gold does still, but that the person who taught him allomancy always thought that it showed you a version of yourself that could have been if you had made different choices. As Vin is recovering from her weird out-of-body experience, they hear a sound and assume that Marsh has now arrived. The first thing that Vin notices when Marsh arrives is that he has the face tattoos of an obligator, but Kelsier tells her that is one of the sacrifices that he made when he agreed to infiltrate the Ministry, and Marsh goes on to update them about a few things. Firstly, the Ministry uses soothing stations all over the city, which are places where the Ministry keeps mistings to both soothe people and also seekers who can burn bronze that can detect other people using allomancy. This is kind of a big reveal, especially because they had no idea about this before, and it really starts to illuminate what the network of spies that the Ministry has is, and also how they are so good at finding mistings and Skaa thieving crews and following people. It really illuminates a lot of these things that we didn't understand how the Ministry was able to do. And then the other thing that Marsh tells us is that he might have attracted too much attention to himself with how well he was performing during training, because they're sending him to all these different soothing stations throughout the city to see how they work, and he has been really standing out in his training compared to the other students that he is in kind of a coterie with. Thirdly, he's learned that the Inquisitors aren't immortal. They don't really know how to kill them, but this is just something he heard as a rumor now that he's infiltrated the Ministry, and they do know that it is possible to kill Inquisitors, which is obviously a big win for them. With that, Marsh has to leave because he's already running late to his next post. At the next ball, a few days later, Vin corners one of the noble gossips and tells her that she has some information that suggests that one of the noble houses, House Hasting, is going to be pulling out from the city soon. This is important because it hurts them economically. If people think that they are leaving the city, then people will start to cancel their existing contracts that they have with House Hasting, which is going to leave them very bereft of money. And these contracts with other houses are what keeps most of the noble houses afloat. They kind of have their own internal economy. These kinds of misinformation are really what's going to help start to break down the structure that these royal houses have built, and really help them start to introduce a lot of doubt and issues into kind of the royal economy, which is going to affect every single one of them. Regardless of their plans, though, Vin can't help but be thankful that Elend is part of House Venture, and House Venture is the most powerful royal house because she really doesn't want to be part of bringing them down and hurting him. Speaking of Elend, Vin ducks into a passageway where her and Elend had agreed to meet to chat, and Elend reveals a lot of things about House Venture, including that they are the house that runs the pits of Hathsin. This makes a lot of sense because it explains how House Venture is so rich, but also doesn't rely on contracts with the other noble houses like most of them do. And there's also a lot of irony in this conversation because Elend keeps telling Vin that she needs to leave the city because things are going to get dangerous very soon, obviously not knowing that her and her friends are the ones who have instigated this danger. Eventually, Elend leaves to go meet his friends, and Vin goes over to Shan's table and is shooed away since Shan has now kind of realized that Vin actually cares about Elend and isn't going to be willing to just be kind of like a pawn in her scheme. We actually get our first section of the story that is from Elend's point of view, in which he returns home from hanging out with his friends and goes to visit his father, Straff Venture. There is some mention of House Venture's Khandra, which we still don't know much about Khandra. All we really know is that they can kind of switch bodies in some way. But the really interesting thing happens when he gets back to his room and his servants tell him that he has a guest waiting for him, and it is Jastes from House Skaa, one of the young men that he meets with pretty frequently. Jastes tells Elend that he had Vin's carriage followed when she left the party because he has been suspicious of her, and that when her terracemen got to the city gates, she was not in the carriage anymore. Jastes theorizes that Vin is a spy from another royal house who was created specifically to get to Elend, and therefore also to House Venture and his father as well. Elend has kind of a hard time believing this, but also agrees that Vin seems a little bit too good to be true and a little bit too much of a match for him. And so after his meeting with Jastes, he goes to his father to basically concede to him that he will do whatever his father wants as far as keeping up appearances for the needs of the family and the royal house, but that he needs to borrow some spies to follow someone, obviously talking about Vin. In the next section, we cut over to Vin reading the Lord Ruler's journal, where he is talking about a terraceman named Rashek that is accompanying him on his journey to the Well of Ascension. He's finally confronted Rashek, who is been pretty rude and kind of stirred up trouble for him throughout the journey. And Rashek feels that the terracemen are really being persecuted by all the other races. He really feels like people are very prejudiced against the Terrace people. But as he's talking about this, he's also approaching the Well of Ascension, and he's talking about how he can't wait to be done with his quest to the Well of Ascension and just be able to live a normal life. It seems like he is kind of tired of being the hero and tired of everyone needing to rely on him to save the day, and he really just wants to be over with so he can have a quiet life. This is very interesting because we know that he goes on to be the Lord Ruler, so this doesn't really line up with the person that we would have thought he would be. We would have thought he would have been more power hungry since he became the Lord Ruler afterwards. Vin gets to the end of that section of the journal and goes to find Sazed to see how the rest of the translation is coming along. But when she finds Sazed, she's disappointed to learn that that was it. That was where the translation ended and also where the journal ended. Vin's obviously disappointed by this, as I think anyone would be if they were reading a story and it ended before the twist even happened. But she also goes outside with Sazed and kind of continues chatting with him, and is telling Sazed how she's really scared for things to change. She likes her life how it is now, and she says likely a year from now, most of them will be either dead or permanently on the run from the ministry. Sanderson is so good at this thing. Firstly, obviously, his character writing is very good. He develops them well. His characters are really lovable. But also, I hadn't even thought about like what Vin would do after this was all over, especially considering the chance that it doesn't go well, which they all seem to think is pretty high. But it makes sense that she would question what her life looks like when this job is over. She has not really had a life where she's able to store up wealth as much as the rest of them. And also, she has made really the first friends and close connections in her life. So you can imagine that leaving them all behind would be like a very emotionally devastating thing to have to go through. She laments about how she likes training with Kelsier and spending time with Elend at the balls, and how she likes spending time with the rest of the crew and how she's grown close to them and that she knows that this can't last forever. But Sazed gives her good life advice, which is just to enjoy her life while it's here and enjoy things while they're around, because life can often surprise you. As they're sitting there in silence, she has a thought and she asks Sazed for some of his ferrochemist metal that has some of his attributes stored in it to see if she can burn it and get access to his ferrochemist powers. So he obliges, and she does swallow some of the metal and says that she can feel his powers sort of distantly, but she doesn't have any access to them. Sazed is pretty relieved by this because obviously if Allomancers could steal power from ferrochemists, that would not be good for the Terrace people as a whole. They hop into a carriage to head over to meet with the rest of the crew, and we cut over to Kelsier, where we find out that the imposter Lord Renew, if you haven't already guessed, is a Khandra, although again we still have gotten no explanation to what that is. They've recovered a map from Marsh that shows them where all of the soothing stations that the Ministry is running has, and they want to take them all out at the same time so they can't coordinate and fight back. But they also agree that the timing of this would be very important, and they would likely need the help of some other thieving crews in the area. We do get a hint that there is more going on here, though, because we kind of get Kelsier's internal monologue, and there is obviously plans within his plans that he has not told the rest of the crew about, and he's talking about how he hopes that Sazed's people, the Keepers, are ready to reteach all of the knowledge that they know and like help kind of reassemble the world, and also how important it's going to be to take out these soothing stations that the Lord Ruler has. At this meeting, Kelsier also asks Vin if she knows anything about House Venture, which she says she doesn't, which we know is a lie, and Kelsier doesn't quite believe her either, but he also doesn't have any proof that she's lying. So he tells her to keep digging and keep looking for information on House Venture the next time she sees Elend. So when she gets to the ball next week at House Venture, she can feel that something immediately is off. Everything is too buttoned up, the ball's attendance is too high, and she approaches a group of nobles that she knows, and they all kind of individually find excuses to leave her alone. So Vin goes up to the balcony where she normally meets Elend to talk to him, and he isn't there, which is surprising, but even more surprising, she looks down to see him sitting down at the House Venture table next to his father, which she's never seen before. Sazed finds her up there and tells her that all of the houses have apparently canceled all their balls going forward, so this is likely to be the last one, and people are acting weird because right now the House War is coming, everyone knows it, and they're all finalizing their alliances. Sazed says that Kelsier is going to need to know this information tonight since he's posing as a noble informant again, and Vin convinces him to leave to tell Kelsier about the House War coming, leaving her all alone at the ball by herself. Vin walks over to Elend's table to talk to him, and Elend basically tells her it's over. They both knew this wasn't going to last, like, it's a very stereotypical sort of breakup speech, and that he knows that she isn't who she says she is, and she's just playing games like the rest of them. She goes out onto the balcony and is obviously upset, but she's followed by Kliss, who is the gossip that she's been talking to for the last little while. But Kliss seems a little too buttoned up and very different from how she normally is, and she also says that Elend will get what he deserves. We learn a lot about Kliss here, mostly that she is really an informant and she sells information, and her kind of giddy gossip persona is exactly that. It's just a persona, and she tells Vin that there is a plot to kill Elend that was orchestrated by his father's Straff Venture, and Shan, his ex-fiance, and that he's going to get what he deserves, basically. Vin is kind of wondering what she owes Elend and why she would even care if anything is going to happen to him, but she really admits to herself that she loves him and runs off into the keep to try to catch either him or the assassins before he is killed. She tries the passageways but can't find a way through, so she ends up bursting through a stained glass window and burning steel to push herself off the ground and bronze to look for anyone, burning metals, while she tears off her fancy dress running after these assassins. She can't feel any pulses that indicate that someone is burning metals, and she assumes that they must have a smoker with them burning copper to hide them, but when she concentrates very hard, she can feel a very faint pulse of someone burning allomantic metals near her. She follows the pulses until she finds 6 assassins, 2 of whom she takes out very quickly with coins, but that leaves 4 remaining, one of which is Shan, who is actually not a misting, but in fact a Mistborn, who orders the other 3 assassins to kill Vin. Vin manages to send one of the assassins through the roof, warning Elend and ruining the surprise that the assassins were going to get, and hopefully prompting Elend to get the hell out of there. And now Shan is very mad because Vin has ruined her opportunity and her plan to kill Elend. Vin realizes now is the time to get out of here now that she's saved Elend and runs off, but Shan and the other assassins that are left chase her. She manages to get rid of another one of the assassins by kind of iron pulling herself down onto sort of a walkway in the keep, and then pushing the other assassin back kind of into the air using allomancy back at Shan. But Shan is still on her tail and closing the gap quickly. Pretty soon, her and Shan are in close quarters combat, and Vin is unarmed while Shan has her glass daggers. Vin remembers the adium that Kelsier gave her and swallows it, but Shan does the same with her own adium. Vin also realizes in this moment that Shan probably has a lot more adium than Vin does because she's actually from a noble house and they would have the money and resources to buy more adium than Vin and Kelsier can get a hold of. Something I did skip over when we were going over our adium explanation a few videos ago is that you can tell when someone else is burning adium if you are burning adium also, because instead of there being only one future shadow thing, there are tons of them. And so it basically makes adium just they can't cancel each other out. So you can use this to your advantage when trying to win that mind game that is who is going to run out of adium first, because you can always tell when the other person is burning adium or not if you're burning adium. And this is also how Mistborn generally tell if the other one is out, because they'll see it go from many different possible futures to just one. So Vin decides that her only option is to go on the offensive because she's not going to be able to defend herself for very long against Shan, who has more adium and weapons, and Vin burns Pewter, punching Shan in the stomach, which doesn't really hurt her but does surprise her. But then she stops burning her adium, Vin does, and this kind of signals to Shan that maybe Vin is out. But when Shan stops burning adium and goes to stab Vin, Vin burns the last of her adium, catching an arrow that was shot at her and stabbing Shan through the stomach with it while avoiding the knife blade that Shan had set to pierce her heart. After that, there is nothing left to do for Vin but flee, now having initiated the noble war.